Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midweek Conversation at First Baptist Sweetwater, where we strive to be the first responders of God's love. I'm in Studio A with my co-host, Teak Hamilton.
Hi, Jerry.
Hello, Teak. How is your day going?
It's going busy. It's
Yeah,
good.
well, we record on Tuesdays now, and so Tuesdays are pretty busy mornings for us anyway.
Right.
And it sets up the week well.
Yeah, it does. We get a lot done.
Yeah, so not a lot of extra going on in our church schedule this week, except for a meeting that we have on Sunday.
Right.
At 6 o'clock. It's I think I've called it day one, and playing on the phrase that I used a couple of weeks ago in a conversation that it's day one for the church.
It'll
Simply
be in the worship center.
In the worship center, and no longer than an hour and a half, I think.
Okay.
I always like to know how long something's going to be personally.
Yep. Did we mention last week that they won't have to worry about getting home to see the Cowboys play? I can't remember if we mentioned that.
We
or
did
not.
not.
Okay. Just making sure.
There's been so many people piling on that storyline that I just haven't had to do much this year.
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't even watch football, and I know that they're not in it
So yeah, it is.
for the last couple decades.
Well, it's Pro Bowl Sunday, which means for fans like myself that not a lot of football going on.
When I was a kid, it was fun to watch with the skills competition. Those were creative.
Yeah.
I wish real football was more like the skills competition.
Well, maybe we should pitch that league.
They might take a lot of ideas right now.
Or we could just stick to what you and I do best,
Okay, that works for me too.
which we're still discovering, but we keep working at it all the time.
Definitely.
Now, this Sunday, we begin a series, or we continue our series, and we use two passages that are very familiar with, or the church should be very familiar with, the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. We cover these verses at least once a year
Right.
in our process, sometimes twice or maybe even more. But this Sunday we'll be pretty much zeroing in on these two verses and what that means for our church. And one of the things that I tell folks is that when a church develops a mission statement or start thinking about their process or their identity, most of the time they start with these two verses.
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably where we started with our transition team, looking at developing mission, vision, and then your foundational statements or whatever. I can't remember exactly how that process went, but I know it was in there because we came up with the idea that First Baptist Church exists to love, and
Right.
that's kind of woven in through those.
Yeah, and it's the transition process for our church, First Baptist Sweetwater. It started in, what'd you say, 2012?
I think 2012. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was 2012.
Okay.
It was either that or 2014. It was an even year.
Okay. I got here in the spring of 2015.
Okay.
So it probably was the earlier
12.
one. And it was a longer process, really kind of maybe a process not so different than what we've experienced through the pandemic months.
Right. Yeah, there was a total, take everything off and restart and see where God leads you. But we had the added fun of developing bylaws, because in that process we discovered the church didn't have bylaws, and apparently that was an important thing. And so that was a fun experience.
Yeah. Well, a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings, and direction went on during that period of time. And one of the things that we've talked about, because you and I are involved in this process day in and day out, is the unique opportunities that we've encountered through the pandemic period in terms of church and how we can continue to engage people that feel are going to be safer when they're at home. And so developing a better online process,
Right.
and still, once we started meeting again, having a good enough of a hybrid experience where a person could, like I like to say, participate at their level of comfort.
Right, definitely. I think one thing we discovered throughout that process was the truth of we're the B team, you're the A team. Your
Right.
family is where your spiritual formation should happen first and foremost. And then the church is where we come together, and hopefully we're enhancing what you're doing at home.
This is off script just a bit.
Always.
But I'm just curious, when you mentioned that, have you started to identify some things that have shifted that will never shift back?
Ooh.
And just in your way of thinking, not so much programming.
Yes, I think I've always said family ministry was important, but I think I see more how we need to partner with families to help them facilitate that until they kind of get hold of that. Because I think there's something intimidating a lot of times about leading your family in personal spiritual formation. Stacey and I were talking about on our walk yesterday that growing up, we had Christian families, but your spiritual formation happened mostly at church because that's what the church taught. The church taught y'all come,
Right.
and so the church never put the emphasis on, it's important for it to happen there. I mean, it's in the DNA of the Israelites for it to be the family, but for some reason we lost that, and we moved away from that. I don't know what decade that happened, but it happened somewhere in there where we took the emphasis off the family and put it on the church and said, you just come here and we'll give you what you need, which is impossible 2 times a week. And so that's one of them. And then facilitating how you are helping families do that along the way. One of the things that I've started doing regularly is on Sunday mornings, all the students that are there, we take attendance as usual, but I send a card home to their parents and it says, here's what we talked about this Sunday. Here's some questions, usually 2 to 3 questions that you can use in conversation to build on that. And it also tells them where we were in Scripture. And so parents can read that. They can then have those conversations. And they're not intimidating answers where there's just absolutely wrong answers, but it's ones to develop conversation and hopefully make that a little more natural. So that's one of the things I've started doing to realize we need to, just saying it isn't enough. How do we help families move from there?
Well, we're talking about it a lot back in the spring when we realized that was what was happening, and we saw this new formation for the church, and we tried not to begrudge all that was going on that put us in that situation,
Right.
but at the same time embrace the parts that brought us back to a better place, or to our what maybe you've described as our roots, as far as
Right.
the church goes, our foundation. But even listening to you describe that, it's the curriculum that you're writing for your students during the Lenten season also includes family worship, or our family.
Right.
There's a family dynamic in there.
Right. Yeah. There's a family devotional, 4 different times for family devotionals, and it's very, it's meant to be non-intimidating, so that you can just sit there and read it to your family. But there's questions in there to develop discussion, and then at the first, there's always that kind of intro activity that gets the family laughing and joking together and engaging with each other. And one of the things I've seen on the other side also is, it's one thing to send a card home, but you know how mail works.
Right.
I mean, I guess everybody knows how mail works. It usually gets taken out of the box, and unless it's a bill, it gets thrown on the table, and then it gets thrown away eventually. And at one point, I mentioned the card I was sending home to the students on a Sunday or Wednesday, and some of the blank stares I got made me realize that maybe that card was a good thought, but now I have to kind of help that out a little bit. So then I started telling students, hey, just so you know, I'm sending this home to your parents, so put a little pressure to steer that conversation. And so there have been a couple times where a kid says, oh, I went home and asked about that card. They're like, yeah, I didn't know we were really supposed to do that. And so at least it's helping kind of put a little bit of conversation in there, because kids will ask, students
Right.
will ask and say, hey, this came home, and they want to tell you what they learned. Sometimes it's just, I think we feel awkward about bringing that conversation up. So hopefully through times like Lent, where there isn't a focus on spirituality, faith journey, that by putting something in their hands, parents and students, families, they all know this is coming down the pipe. This is something we need to set time aside for. And the more they do that, even if it's assigned in a sense, the more it becomes natural. And so then hopefully you're building a generation who sees that as important, and they take that on themselves to disciple their own families.
Well, and to follow with our philosophy here, that it's those Bible studies don't end with a period on Sunday or Wednesday, but it becomes a part of the regular conversation, which is why we use the word conversation.
Right. And I remember when we first started, when you first got here and we had that word conversation that we used, I remember getting an email where someone was confused by why we called it conversation. And it's so easy to explain it, but it's so foreign to our vocabulary that it is one of the things. Well, it's always been called a sermon. Well, yeah, but I don't think anybody can define what a sermon is.
Right.
Like they say, well, it's the sermon. You can't define it without using the word. But conversation, you can say it's meant to develop this interaction between you and an ongoing communication about it. Like you got all these other words that can develop what that means. And we understand conversation.
Well, and a part, that's kind of when you start to look at the text that we're looking at Sunday. I forget this. I don't know why I don't think about it on a more consistent basis, but whenever I read this passage and start looking in the commentaries, the question was set up to Jesus, asking him what was the greatest commandment. And the way we typically talk about that, it was to a bit of a, they were testing Jesus,
right.
But the test wasn't the way we might view it, what we might view a test, where Jesus was either going to get it right or get it wrong.
Right.
That the question, what's the greatest commandment, was a part of their conversation.
Right.
The Pharisees, as they would meet together and study together and learn together, that was a regular part of their conversation, right. Because through their process, and this is what always kind of surprises me that I should know from time to time, they dealt with 613 laws of Moses that they had added to the Ten Commandments. And so through that process, this conversation or this style of learning was a part of who they were.
Right.
So for one, and I'll probably bring this up Sunday, but I thought of it again as it applies to this conversation, was some say that they were just trying to see if Jesus even was aware that right. conversation was going on.
Right.
So what you're saying is, with your students, it's them wanting to make sure that their parents know that this conversation is actually going on.
Definitely.
So, so Sunday we do talk about these two passages, and they are some cornerstone passages: the Great Commandment and then the Great Commission, where Jesus spent time with his disciples, giving them a brief outline, a game plan for what life was going to be like after he left. And certainly for the church and where we are, in light of this message Sunday and the meeting that we're going to have on Sunday night, is we have the opportunity that we're not given many times.
Right.
And it's not an opportunity of starting over necessarily, but it's an opportunity, hopefully, in our mindset and our spirit and anticipation, a mindset of starting.
It's that day one mentality.
Right. And so I don't know, I don't think I've said this from the stage or with a microphone, but I knew in my conversation somewhere I'd made reference to the fact that our church, it's not often that a church gets to have a blank canvas after they're 140 years old.
Right.
I found out that this fall, First Baptist Sweetwater will have been established for 140 years.
Wow.
So yeah, I wasn't...
I didn't know that.
I knew it was approximate because one day we were looking around it for some things. I forget what we were looking for specifically, and we found some booklets from the 135th anniversary celebration.
Even before that.
Or might have been 130.
It was before I got here. It was 25th.
Maybe it's 125.
125, yeah. Because I saw those again the other day. They were the programs or something for what they did.
Yeah. So we have started a conversation about maybe doing something this fall in recognition of that. But here we are. It's day one for the church. Right. And a lot of folks, we're having questions. They're questions that we deal with sometimes moment by moment as far as what this looks like for us. But we hope to be able to use these passages that we've already talked about, and the one we'll talk about Sunday, to as really sort of not just a backdrop, but really our motivation for looking at what our future looks like. And so one of the things that I had said early on in one of our deacons meetings was that it might be 2022 before the church started to look like, before we would really know what the church started to look like for the future. And even living in the moment where we see vaccines rolling out, this process is still very, very slow. And so anyways, we're looking forward to that time and that conversation, and then also being able to start our study on Sunday morning through these two great passages. So anyways, it's going to be a fun day, and whether you join us live or online, we look forward to being a part of your worship.
See you then.